Can we really confuse the Satan on Rosh Hashanah? Because there are various things that we do to confuse the Satan, but surely by now he's learned all of our tricks. Who one of the reasons that we do not mention on Rosh Hashanah that it is Rosh Chodesh is to confuse the Satan, that he should not realize that today is the first day of Tishrei, and will not come to level accusations against us. So this idea of confusing the Satan is also brought as the reason to our minhag why we do not bless the month of Tishrei on Shabbos Mevorchim prior to the month of Tishrei, as we do every other month of Shabbos Mevorchim, every other month of the year. But the Chayrin move, and it really does not make sense. First of all, the Satan is a malach, not a fool. He participates in the goings on in the supernal Beis Din. As Sefer Irav tells us right at the beginning, that the Satan arrives on Rosh Hashanah together with all the other angels in front of the Eibishter, to stand in front of the Eibishter. So how do you think you can confuse the Satan or mislead the Satan with something which is so simple? To the extent that we believe that because of the customs we follow, that the Satan will not know that today's Rosh Hashanah, something which is extremely public. It's printed in the calendars. Surely the Satan could just check a calendar. So what do we really mean when we say we're going to confuse the Satan that he won't know that it is Rosh Hashanah? So this reason is also quoted in the Levush, that we confuse the Satan so he will not recognize that it's Rosh Hashanah. But the Levush adds another perspective which may answer our question, which is because we haven't formally sanctified the day as Rosh Chodesh, which means maybe the explanation is, seeing as we know that what establishes the months is then up to us, we have to have a Beis Din that declares the month, and only then does it become a month. The only way that a month is designated as a new month is when we, the Jewish people, sanctify it. Only when we establish that this day is Rosh Chodesh, then it becomes Rosh Chodesh. Up until that point in time, it has no value assigned to it. And that is so real that our sages tell us, when the Malachim appear in front of the Eibishter and they ask, when is Rosh Hashanah and when is Yom Kippur, the Eibishter can't tell them. The Eibishter says, you're asking me, let's, you and I together, let's go to the Beis Din Shamata, see what they determine to be Rosh Chodesh. So maybe that's the answer. So it turns out, the fact that we don't mention Rosh Chodesh in the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, when we don't announce Rosh Chodesh on the Shabbos prior to Rosh Hashanah, it is as if we haven't formally made Rosh Hashanah into the first day of Tishrei, which would then lead the Satan not to know, at least not to know with certainty, when exactly Rosh Hashanah is going to be, and maybe that's how we are going to mislead the Satan. Great answer, except there are two reasons why this is an insufficient answer. Number one, there are many things we do on Rosh Hashanah which clearly illustrate and emphasize that today is Rosh Hashanah, which automatically is the first day of Tishrei. How can we think that because we didn't make the formal announcement that today is Rosh Chodesh, or that the coming day is going to be Rosh Chodesh, that's going to confuse the Satan? He'll just have a look around. There's apples in honey. There's people doing tashlich. There's a shofar. Furthermore, the main thing is the truth is that this idea of confusing the Satan is quoted with regards to other minhagim, where this answer of saying, well, we haven't established Rosh Chodesh, will not apply. Because these other two examples have no correlation with Rosh Chodesh. What are they? Aleph. And we say, I'm talking about Erev Rosh Hashanah. This is also used as an explanation why, although we blow the shofar the whole Elul, we do not blow the shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. To give the Satan the impression that Rosh Hashanah is already past, he missed it. Base, likewise, this is also the reason why we begin the cycle of reading the Torah afresh, only on Simchas Torah, not on Rosh Hashanah, so that the Satan will not be able to detect when is the end of the preceding year and the beginning of the new year. Now, those things have nothing to do with Rosh Chodesh. How do you think that those things are going to fool the Satan year after year after year over thousands of years? In which case our question still stands. How could we suggest that we don't blow shofar erev Rosh Hashanah and we don't start Parshas Bereshis on Rosh Hashanah? That that's going to convince the Satan that Rosh Hashanah has already passed. Especially if there are so many other things that testify to the fact that today is Rosh Chodesh and therefore Rosh Hashanah. How then could we believe that we're still confusing the Satan with the same trick that we've used for centuries? But you want to understand that, we're going to look at another custom, which is also quoted as a custom in order to confuse the Satan. And that is our minhag to blow shofar right throughout Elul. That confuses the Satan. He doesn't know which one is Rosh Hashanah. Oh, you blew shofar today. Maybe today's Rosh Hashanah. Oh no, maybe it's tomorrow. Tomorrow's Rosh Hashanah. Same question. How could you fool the Satan? Because you blow shofar today, so therefore he doesn't know when Rosh Hashanah is again. He can check the calendar. He could listen. The way that we blow during Elul is different to how we blow during Rosh Hashanah. Surely it doesn't work to fool somebody as complex and sophisticated and advanced as the Satan. So let's suggest another explanation. This idea of confusing the Satan on Rosh Hashanah is something the Gemara actually mentions in Rosh Hashanah about how we blow shofar through the course of Rosh Hashanah itself, not only beforehand, but on Rosh Hashanah. How can we blow the shofar first when everybody is seated, even though it's not our custom to sit, and then we blow again the shofar when everybody is standing, in other words, during the Musaf HaMidah? That is to confuse the Satan. How does that confuse the Satan? Rashi tells us that the Satan will not feel that he is in a position to accuse the Jewish people, because when he hears how much the Jewish people cherish the mitzvahs, look, we're blowing more than we are required to do. So that is mistatmin dvarav, shuts him up. He can't actually say what he wanted to say, because look, how can I accuse these people who are so dedicated to the Eibishter? In other words, because the Jewish people are not satisfied with the mandated amount of blowing shofar once, but we repeat it again during Musaf. That shows you how much we cherish the mitzvahs. And that silences the Satan who wanted to accuse us of lack of dedication. Well, look at this. We have so much dedication. That would also explain that by blowing shofar during Elul, it does the same thing to silence the Satan, because how can he accuse us of negligence if look how dedicated we are? In Yon and Shalat Kiyas B'Chedesh Elul Hu Ki Yodua, we know very well that the reason we blow shofar during Elul is Kedar Hazu Yisrael She'asu Tshuva, to warn and awaken the Jewish people to do tshuva. Shenem, as the pasuk says, Im Yitoka Shofar Be'ir Gomer, is it possible that the shofar should blow in a city and people are not awakened? And therefore, the very fact that through the course of Elul we blow shofar and that awakens us to do tshuva, that throws the Satan off his perch. Because the Satan thinks, look, it's quite possible that you didn't have done tshuva now through the whole of Chodesh Elul. Maybe they have already earned all of the brachas and merits that they need for the coming year. Therefore, there's no value in trying to now fight and accuse them, because it's already been decided, and therefore that silences him. That would also explain the explanation. That would explain how it is that by blowing shofar during Rosh Hashanah, the Satan does not know when Rosh Hashanah. During Elul, the Satan does not know when Rosh Hashanah is. What does it mean he doesn't know when Rosh Hashanah is? Not that he doesn't know the date. Saying that he doesn't know when Rosh Hashanah does not mean it's not that he doesn't know the date of Rosh Hashanah. He doesn't know when the value and the theme of the day is activated. Which is the judgment of Rosh Hashanah, which is his only opportunity to speak up against us. He doesn't know. Maybe it's not on Rosh Hashanah Gufa. First, as the Maharil says clearly, he doesn't know when the judgment is going to happen, so he doesn't know when he should present his case. Because when we do tshuva properly before Rosh Hashanah arrives, then we're guaranteed that we're going to be not only written, but sealed in the book of Tzadikim. Which means that we've already been written and mandated for positive things already in Elul. As we find in many places in Torah, it's not only Rosh Hashanah, it's not only Elul. Any day of the year, not only on special days like Rosh Hashanah, by doing proper tshuva, by davening properly, we are able on any day of the year to invoke from Hashem an absolutely positive outcome. Ledugma, classic example is Chizkiyahu Melech Po'al al Yidei Tshuva Tefillah. Chizkiyahu Melech, who was destined to pass away because of his davening and because of his tshuva, was able to successfully earn an extra additional 15 years of life to his life. When you read the story in Tanakh, there is nothing to imply that it was a special day, certainly not that it was Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, any day of the year, we're capable of acquiring for ourselves a good year and brachas. That's why the Satan is thrown, of course, by us blowing shofar during the course of Elul, because he now thinks Jewish people have probably already earned themselves a positive outcome because they did tshuva during Elul, and that is effective. Therefore, his accusations are now moot. They can't achieve anything. So at the very least, or at the very best in his case, the Satan's presentation on Rosh Hashanah is on insecure ground. He doesn't have the same power, the same strength, because who knows, maybe I'm arriving to the party too late. That also explains why we would not blow shofar Erev Rosh Hashanah, which would convince the Satan the day of judgment has already passed. In other words, to further confuse the Satan, that he would be absolutely convinced that we have already achieved what we needed to achieve before we got to Rosh Hashanah during the month of Elul. Because the blowing of shofar during Elul aroused us to do proper tshuva, and therefore we're good. Look how confident we are. We don't even feel the need to blow shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We don't need that arousal anymore. That's for sure going to weaken the position of the Satan. The Satan knows that not blowing shofar Erev Rosh Hashanah is a long-standing minhag. And the reason for the minhag, the Satan also knows, to try and confuse him. But he also knows that this is a Jewish minhag, and a Jewish minhag is Torah, and Torah is absolutely true. Therefore, there's the possibility that if this year the Jewish people got it right and they merited a good outcome, that means they will absolutely achieve and earn the opportunity for an outright good outcome. And therefore, the work of Rosh Hashanah will be considered like the day of judgment has passed. And therefore, at the very best, he's there arguing his case on a doubt, maybe, or maybe not. He even has room to speak, and that's a much weaker case, which is good for us. So that explains all about the shofar and our customs around shofar in Elul and no shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah, and the way we blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, that we double it up. But can we also use this to explain the other things that are supposed to confuse the Satan? The things that we omit out of either the preceding Shabbos Mevorachim or Rosh Hashanah itself to confuse the Satan. Will this explanation work too? The fact that Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is not just a matter of how things appear on the calendar. That logically, if it's the beginning of a year, it must also be the beginning of that particular month. The fact that it is Rosh Chodesh adds value, or as the Gemara will put it, adds benefit to Rosh Hashanah. In other words, Rosh Chodesh adds value to Rosh Hashanah. Yisayros mitzad yoyis yom zeh Rosh Chodesh, moisifa l'yisayros l'avodas hayom shel Rosh Hashanah. Knowing and being alive to the idea that today is Rosh Chodesh adds value to and adds impetus to the avodah that we're supposed to do on Rosh Hashanah, which also then adds impetus to our good outcome that we expect on Rosh Hashanah. Likewise, if we were to have read Parashas Bereshis in Rosh Hashanah, it would have benefited us. The reason to read Shabbos Bereshis on Rosh Hashanah is not only because it's the beginning of the year, but concluding the annual Torah reading and committing to learn the Torah again, that is obviously to our benefit. It's another merit that we could notch up for Rosh Hashanah. There's no question about it. If we could have had the added impetus of Rosh Chodesh and the added mitzvahs of concluding and restarting the Torah, surely that would have added value to our Rosh Hashanah and given us more reason to be able to have a positive judgment. So that would explain, again, using the logic that we've already used, which is, let's convince the Satan that we have already achieved what we had to achieve, and we're already good. Well, maybe that's the same thing, leaving out Rosh Chodesh in the davening on Rosh Hashanah. As we've already mentioned, it's not because we want to convince the Satan that it's a different day on the calendar. But we understand that this is all because Rosh Chodesh is tied into our avodah. The lack of mention of Rosh Chodesh is tied into our avodah. How so? The fact that we as a Jewish nation omit Rosh Chodesh in our davening on Rosh Hashanah. What's going to happen is the Satan's not going to feel the extra impetus that Rosh Chodesh would have put into our service of Hashem. And he won't recognize the value of Rosh Chodesh in our davening. Likewise, the idea that we only start to read Bereshis on Simchas Torah, not Rosh Hashanah, so he shouldn't recognize this at the beginning of the year. The very fact that we don't start reading Bereshis on Rosh Hashanah, that will cause the Satan to believe or to conclude so you know what? They're missing that trick. They're missing that merit of being a day that they should have started reading the Torah. That's going to confuse the Satan. And he's not going to come forward to accuse the Jewish people because he's going to believe they've already sorted themselves out before Rosh Hashanah came. And that implies that they are so dedicated and at such a level of service to the Eibishter that they don't need the added value of Rosh Chodesh. They don't need the added value of completing and starting the Torah again because they are already in Hashem's good books. And therefore the Satan says, why should I even bother trying to accuse? Because they are so secure in their position, they didn't need to invoke Rosh Chodesh. They didn't need to start the parasha from Bereshis. Although that fits with what we said prior, that you don't blow shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah, or you have blown shofar during Elul, because we are so confident, or at least we convinced the Satan that we're so confident that we've achieved what we had to achieve. But when it comes to these two things, omitting Rosh Chodesh and not starting the Torah fresh, it's not so simple. Because if the way we've explained it now, it turns out, by not mentioning Rosh Chodesh, and not starting to read the Torah again from Bereshis, all that does is confuses the Satan. What we're doing is, to confuse the Satan, we're giving the impression that we've already done what we had to do, and we don't need all these extra elements. If that is true, that the message is, we don't need Rosh Chodesh to boost us, we don't need Parashas Bereshis to assist us, then we should have said something like that. We should have emphasized not only the negative side, that he won't know that today is Rosh Chodesh. And there should have been something in the narrative that highlights the positive, that we have achieved something that is akin to what we're supposed to achieve in Rosh Hashanah. We don't say that in any of our sources. We say simply, we do not explicitly mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. Why? To confuse the Satan. So you shouldn't recognize that today is Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, and therefore you shouldn't accuse us today. Mashma. Sounds like we're saying the reason he's not going to accuse us is because he's not sure if this is the correct day. It does not sound like we're saying, and we are so empowered because of everything that we have done, we don't have to worry about the Satan. This is different to suggesting that we don't have to blow shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah so that the Satan will imagine that the Day of Judgment has passed. Because that expression ain't taken Erev Rosh Hashanah. The fact that we say don't blow shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah reminds us and emphasizes that we had blown shofar through the whole of Elul, which is something positive that we had done. And because we did that blowing of shofar, which was supposed to awaken us to tshuva, that's why we're confident not to blow shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah, and the Satan will think that the Day of Judgment has already passed because it's in the bag. But here, we're not emphasizing something positive. We're just saying you don't mention Rosh Chodesh, you don't lay in Bereshis. But we haven't said anything about what positive avodah we've done. So therefore, the concept of confusing the Satan with regards to these two things, not mentioning Rosh Chodesh, and only reading Pashas Bereshis and Simchas Torah, who is a different message. When the Satan realizes, wow, it's Rosh Hashanah, which is also Rosh Chodesh, and the Jews are not mentioning Rosh Chodesh. Which means that the Jews are not being aroused by the theme and message of Rosh Chodesh. And that Satan realizes that we're not invoking the fact that we're finishing the Torah and starting Shabbos Bereshis. That weakens his poison against us. Because he's going to say, you know what? The Jews they don't need me to be so harsh because they're actually lacking in their avodah. And therefore the Satan says, I don't have to go dig up more dirt on the Jewish people. Look, they are not doing things that should have worked for them. Even though the Satan knows that they're skipping Rosh Chodesh and not starting Bereshis to confuse him. But whichever way you look at it, there is no power of Rosh Chodesh on this day. There is no value of starting the Torah on this day. With all the consequences that would produce. The Satan says, you know what? They don't have, as part of their arsenal, the awakening, the arousal of Rosh Chodesh, or the value of finishing and completing and restarting the Torah. That's why he doesn't feel he has to push so hard. But that raises a big question in the other direction. Does it really make sense that we should withhold things that are in our interest from us on Rosh Hashanah? Yes, the intention is to confuse the Satan and weaken his arguments against us. But at what cost? The reality is that the Jewish people are now missing key elements of our avodah. We're missing the awakening to tshuva that the shofar could have done for us on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We're missing the value and awakening that could have come from knowing today is also Rosh Chodesh. And we're missing the value of completing and restarting the Torah. Is it worth it just in an attempt to confuse the Satan, to remove all of those assets from us? The answer is far more profound than we thought. The very fact that we have less spiritual power at our disposal, and the reason we're doing it is to confuse the Satan, that should make us realize, and it does make us realize, we need to do a far deeper kind of tshuva. Had there been Rosh Chodesh, it would have brought us to a certain level of tshuva. Had we blown shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah, it would have brought us to a certain level of tshuva. We need to find an even deeper level of tshuva. We need to find the tshuva that comes from the deepest voice within ourselves. As we know, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, what is it that awakens the deepest kind of tshuva from within ourselves? That feeling, that bitter feeling of being distant from Hashem. That is that awareness of our distance from Hashem and how bitter it is to be distant from Hashem, something that is embedded very deeply in our heart. You know what wakes a person to this reality? They had to take away from me my Rosh Chodesh, my Tkiya on Erev Hashanah, my opportunity to start Bereshis. They took that all away from me. Why? Because I'm dealing with a Satan who needs to be confused. That illustrates how distant I am from Hashem, and therefore I have to do much more tshuva than I even thought. Or makir or margish b'matzav, that causes the person to recognize their reality. That the Satan has that kind of power over me. Because of that, we've got to keep away certain things about blowing shofar. We remove the shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah. We remove the mention of Rosh Chodesh. We remove the what do you call it? The reading of Pashas Bereshis. The truth is, in a certain respect, this type of tshuva that is then instigated within us is even more profound than the tshuva that the shofar does. When the shofar makes me feel chills down my spine, and then it arouses me to do tshuva, that is an external force that got me to do tshuva. As reading Pashas Bereshis or mentioning Rosh Chodesh would be external factors that influence me to do tshuva. But when a Jew is doing tshuva, why? Because there is something that had to be taken away from me. They stop me blowing shofar or mentioning Rosh Chodesh or reading Bereshis. Why? Because I'm in trouble. I've got a big Satan that's out to get me. Then it's my reality, my circumstances that wake me to tshuva. Not you waking me, not something waking me. It's me waking myself to tshuva. And we can understand this based on a story with the Rebbe Rashab at the beginning of his leadership. There was a Jew who came to the Rebbe Rashab for Yechidus. And he asked a bracha for something very serious in his life. He needed a tremendous amount of divine compassion. But the Rebbe Rashab said, unfortunately, he was unable to help him. You can imagine what that did to the person. When he heard such a response, this Yid left the Rebbe Rashab's office and he was crying hysterically. So he's walking around crying in a complete state, and he bumps into the Rebbe Rashab's brother, the Razah. So the Razah asks him, why are you crying so bitterly? So he told the whole story, what happened, what he's dealing with, how he went to ask the Rebbe Rashab for a bracha, and what the Rebbe told him, that he can't help him. So the Razah went into the Rebbe Rashab's room. So this was still in the early days of the Rebbe Rashab's Nesius, and therefore maybe it was a little bit more comfortable for the Razah to walk in. And he said, how could you do this? When a Yid comes to you to ask for a bracha, you're telling me you can't help him? To the extent that he is now a broken man, crying like hysterically because he's in so much pain. So the Rebbe Rashab put on his girdle, and he gave an instruction that this Jew should come back into Yechidus. When he came in, the Rebbe gave him a bracha. And the bracha was fulfilled. Such a story you have to understand. Seeing as the Rebbe Rashab could help him, how do we know that? From the end of the story. So why didn't he just help him in the first place? Why did he dismiss him in such a way that reduced him to tears? The explanation is aligned with what we're saying happens to us on Rosh Hashanah when we realize that we don't have the whole arsenal of all these extra tricks that would help us to do tshuva. This Jew who came to ask a bracha from the Rebbe Rashab, at that particular point, he was not yet ready, because of where he was in his spiritual stature. He wasn't yet in a position that he could receive the kind of massive bracha that his situation required. He wasn't, he didn't have the receptor to be able to pick up this bracha. So there's no way to help a person. You can give them all the bracha in the world. If they are not ready to absorb it, it's not going to help. But when the Rebbe Rashab told him, there's nothing I could do to help you, that broke him. And that caused him to pour his heart out sincerely to the Eibishter. That then caused him to become a whole new transformed person, a new reality, which opened him up to be able to receive the brachas that the Eibishter wanted to give him and the Rebbe Rashab wanted to give him. It's the same thing with us on Rosh Hashanah. Suddenly we realize we don't have somebody supporting us. We don't have a Rosh Chodesh supporting us, or a Tekiyah Shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah, or a Shabbos Bereshis. We have to dig deep, like this chassid who felt that the Rebbe can't help him. He has to help himself. But you can take it even deeper. Not only does the realization that we don't have all of these support systems, not only will that wake us to do a far deeper tshuva, but when we do this kind of tshuva, then whatever the Shabbos Bereshis or the Rosh Chodesh or the Tekiyah on Erev Hashanah was supposed to achieve is also achieved. Why do we stop all these things? Why don't we mention Rosh Chodesh? Why don't we blow shofar Erev Hashanah? It's a minute. It's part of Torah. Which means not blowing shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah is doing what the Eibishter wants, which we should do b'simcha. Not mentioning Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah is doing what the Eibishter wants. We should omit it b'simcha. If a person is doing mitzvahs because they make sense, or because the person enjoys the mitzvah, then you can start distinguishing between one mitzvah and another. That if there's a custom where the custom is to leave something out of my spiritual service, maybe it won't inspire or touch me as much as something which I have to do. That's exactly what the Satan's thinking. He looks, you're not mentioning Rosh Chodesh, you're not laying Bereshis, you didn't blow shofar yesterday. To me, it looks like you're missing something in your service. Well, that could be the reality for some people who feel you've taken away part of my Jewish experience. And it's very possible that the Satan is unaware of the reality of this deep crying voice from within ourselves. And even if the Satan believes that he understands what we're thinking, there are many, many layers of thought. But if I'm looking from a true prism, if I'm concerned with what the Eibishter, the king, wants, then there's no difference if I'm doing something proactively or if I'm leaving something out. As long as it's what the Eibishter wants, that's what counts. When a Yid fulfills mitzvahs, why? Because the Eibishter sanctified us with this mitzvah and instructed us to do it. Then it makes no difference what the mitzvah is or isn't in this case. Not to mention Rosh Chodesh, not to lay in Shabbos Bereshis. Even if, from the perspective of the rational mind, it looks like I'm losing out on something which should have been positive, because I know that is Torah. Well, then I'm going to do it with absolute simcha because I'm fulfilling Torah. That type of dedication to say, I'm going to do whatever the Eibishter wants from me, even if that comes at what I think is a spiritual cost. That opens us up for down in the reality of our lives, that affects us materially and spiritually, and the two of them together. And Mitzvah Hashem, that should be the bracha that we all have this year.